This happened many years ago, but I never had the courage to tell this story. Until now, I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that my mind distorted the events, but I can't ignore the fact that my friends died. And I didn't. To this day, I wonder why. What made me escape when everyone else succumbed? And, more importantly, am I really safe even now? These questions haunt me more than anything else because I know the truth. It was real. I grew up listening to my parents' stories about the horrors of war in Cambodia. My father lost brothers. My mother saw entire villages wiped out. When we fled to the United States, we thought we had left all the suffering behind. But what no one knew was that something came with us. Something that didn't belong to this world. Something that didn't care about borders or continents. At first, it was just whispers in the corners of our houses, a chill down our spines with no apparent cause. But then, the death started. The first was my friend's older brother, Dara. He was 17, strong, healthy, never sick a day in his life. But then he began waking up screaming, drenched in sweat, gasping for air like he had been drowning in his sleep. He spoke about a shadowy figure, something lurking in his dreams, watching him, waiting. It had eyes that glowed in the dark, long fingers that scratched at the edges of his vision. He stopped sleeping, terrified of what would happen if he closed his eyes. He drank coffee all night, pinched himself to stay awake. But eventually, exhaustion won, and he never woke up. His parents were devastated, but the doctors had no answers. Sudden unexplained death, they called it, as if that meant anything. We were just kids, but we knew something was wrong. It wasn't normal. It wasn't random. And then it happened again. Another boy from our neighborhood, Sok, started complaining about the same thing. Something chasing him in his sleep. He tried to stay awake too, but just like Dara, his body gave in. His mother found him in bed, eyes wide open, mouth slightly parted like he had tried to scream. But he was gone. Panic spread among the older Cambodians in our community. They whispered about an ancient spirit, a vengeful force that had followed us from the old country. They said it preyed on those who let their guard down in sleep, stealing their breath, dragging their souls into darkness. My parents didn't want me to hear these stories, but I did. I heard everything, and I was terrified. It didn't matter if I believed in ghosts or demons. People were dying, and no one could explain why. Then my best friend, Chantha, started seeing it too. Chantha was the toughest kid I knew. He never backed down from a fight, never showed fear. But after Sok died, he changed. He stopped joking around, stopped sleeping over at my place. When I asked him what was wrong, he just shook his head. Then one night, he called me, whispering into the phone like he was afraid someone else might hear. He told me he'd seen it, the same thing Dara and Sok described. The shadow with glowing eyes, the fingers stretching toward him in his dreams. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The next morning, Chantha was dead. I remember standing outside his house, watching as they carried him away on a stretcher. His mother wailed, clutching at his lifeless body, begging him to wake up. But I knew he wouldn't. None of them ever did. That night, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending this was just some strange coincidence. I was next. I could feel it. Whatever this thing was, it was moving through us, picking us off one by one. And I was running out of time. I stopped sleeping. I did everything I could to stay awake. Drank energy drinks until my hands shook, blasted music in my ears, even slapped myself whenever I started to drift off. But exhaustion is a cruel thing. It wears you down, breaks you piece by piece until your body betrays you. On the 4th night without sleep, I couldn't fight it anymore. I remember sitting on my bed, my head heavy, my eyelids like lead. I told myself I'd just rest for a second. Just a second. Then I was dreaming, but it didn't feel like a dream. It felt real, too real. I was in my room, but everything was wrong. Too dark, too still, like the world had stopped breathing. My door creaked open slowly, even though I knew I had locked it. And then I saw them, the ones who had died. Dara, Sok, Chantha. They stood in my doorway, eyes hollow, faces frozen in silent screams. Their mouths moved, whispering something I couldn't understand, their hands reaching for me. And behind them, in the shadows, it waited, watching. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. My breath came in short, panic gasps as the thing behind them stepped forward. It was just a shape at first, a silhouette darker than the blackness around it. Then I saw its eyes, two burning points of light, locked onto me. Its fingers were impossibly long, curling like claws, reaching, stretching. I could hear something, a sound so low it felt like it was crawling inside my skull. A whisper? A growl? I don't know. But I knew one thing. If it touched me, I was dead. I forced myself to move. Every muscle in my body screamed, but I wrenched free from whatever was holding me down and bolted for the door. The hallway outside my room twisted and stretched, like I was running through an endless tunnel. My legs felt like they were sinking into the floor with every step. Behind me, I heard it move, not footsteps, something worse, a scraping, dragging sound like nails on wood. It was getting closer. I could feel its breath on my neck, a rotten, burning heat. My vision blurred, my body felt like it was shutting down. I was losing. I was going to die. Then, just as its fingers grazed my shoulder, I did the only thing I could think of. I forced myself to wake up. I don't know how, but I fought against the heaviness pulling me down, against the paralysis, against the thing reaching for me. I screamed, but no sound came out. I thrashed, but my body barely moved. Then suddenly I was back. My eyes flew open, my body jerking so violently that I fell off my bed, hitting the floor hard. My heart was pounding, my skin was ice cold, and my throat burned like I had been screaming for hours. But I wasn't alone. The room was still wrong. The shadows were too deep, stretching unnaturally across the walls. My door, locked before I went to sleep, was now slightly open, just like in the dream. And the worst part? My window. It was covered in condensation, like someone had been breathing against it from the outside. But I was on the second floor. I stayed there, frozen on the floor, my back pressed against the bed, too scared to move. I listened. The house was silent, but I swear I could hear something faint, something almost like breathing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, my ears straining for any sound, my body too afraid to move. My lungs burned from holding my breath, but I didn't dare make a noise. I kept staring at the window, at the faint outline of condensation that shouldn't be there. Then, just as my mind started convincing me that maybe I was imagining it, that maybe it was just leftover fear from the dream, something changed. The condensation on the glass shifted, like someone had just exhaled. That was enough. I bolted. I didn't care if I woke my parents. I didn't care if I looked crazy. I just ran. I threw my door open and sprinted down the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I almost collapsed on the stairs. I reached my parents' room, slammed my fists against their door, and screamed for them to wake up. When my dad finally opened the door, I could barely speak. I was crying, gasping, trying to explain what had happened, but I could see it in his face. He didn't believe me. Not really. He thought it was just a nightmare. But then he looked past me, and his face went pale. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but my dad's face told me everything I needed to know. Something was behind me. Slowly, I turned my head, and for the briefest second I saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall, standing at the end of the hallway. Its glowing eyes burned in the darkness, locked onto me. But the worst part? The thing didn't move. It just stood there watching, waiting. Then in a blink it was gone. My dad grabbed me by the arm and yanked me into their room, slamming the door shut behind us. My mom was already awake, asking what was going on, but he didn't answer. He just stood there listening. I could still hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, but the house was completely silent. Too silent. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my dad. He never admitted what he saw. Not fully, but I knew. After that, he started keeping a small Buddhist shrine in my room, lighting incense every night before bed. He told me it was just for protection, but we both knew the truth. Something had come for me, and it wasn't finished. For weeks after that night, I refused to sleep alone. My dad never talked about what he saw, but he started acting differently. Praying more, placing small charms around the house, burning incense before bed. My mom thought he was overreacting, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared, and if he was scared, then I knew I had every reason to be terrified. But eventually life went on. The fear never left, but I forced myself to move past it. I was exhausted, barely making it through school, but nothing happened. No more nightmares. No more whispers. No more shadows watching from my doorway. I started convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, it was over. Maybe the thing had moved on. Then one night my cousin died. He didn't live with us. He was in another state hundreds of miles away. But the way he died was the same. He was young, healthy, no medical issues. He went to bed like normal and never woke up. When my family got the call, I remember feeling numb. I already knew. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to hear the details. Because I knew. It had found him. That was the moment I realized the truth. This thing wasn't tied to a place. It wasn't haunting a house or a neighborhood. It was following us. My friends, my family, anyone connected to me. And it wasn't finished. I started sleeping in short bursts, never letting myself drift too deep. I'd set alarms every hour, forcing myself awake before the dreams could take hold. It worked for a while. Weeks passed, then months. And for a brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe I had outrun it. Maybe it had lost interest. Then one night I slipped up. I was so tired I forgot to set my alarm. The moment I closed my eyes, I knew I had made a mistake. I wasn't in my room anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere wrong. The air was thick and heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I couldn't see, but I could feel something there. Watching, waiting, and then, out of the darkness, I heard it. A whisper. My name. And it was right behind me. I couldn't move. My entire body was frozen, like something was pressing down on me, keeping me trapped in that darkness. My name echoed again, this time closer, almost like a breath against my ear. My skin crawled. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body refused to listen. Then I felt it, fingers impossibly long and cold curling around my shoulder. And I knew if I turned around, I would never wake up. I don't know how I did it, but I fought. I forced my body to move, thrashing against the weight pressing down on me. It felt like I was drowning, sinking deeper with every second. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, and just when I thought I couldn't fight anymore, my eyes snapped open. I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. But something was wrong. My door was open, and I knew for a fact I had locked it. I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes stayed locked on the open doorway, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe my parents checked on me, maybe the wind pushed it open. But deep down I knew. The thing from my dreams had been here. And for the first time, it hadn't stayed in the dream. I listened, straining my ears for any sound, any sign that I wasn't alone. The house was dead silent, but the air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. Then, slowly, I turned my head toward the window. And there it was. The condensation was back, just like before. But this time there was something else. A streak, like someone had dragged a finger through the fogged-up glass. At first, my tired mind struggled to understand what I was looking at. Then it hit me. It was a word. Soon. I stopped breathing. My whole body locked up as I stared at that single word smeared across the condensation. Soon. It was a message, a warning, or worse, a promise. I scrambled out of bed so fast I nearly tripped. My hands were shaking as I reached for the window, for anything that could prove to me that I was imagining this. But the glass was cold, too cold, and when I wiped at the moisture, the word didn't disappear right away. It smudged like whatever had written it had really been there. outside, watching me. But that was impossible. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept every light on, sat in the corner of my room, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The house stayed quiet. No footsteps, no shadows, no whispers, just silence. When the sun finally rose, I told my dad. I expected him to brush it off, to tell me it was just a bad dream. But instead, he just looked at me. Then, without a word, he grabbed his car keys. We were going to see a monk. The temple was small, tucked away in the outskirts of town, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. My dad barely spoke the entire drive. He just kept rubbing his hands together like he was trying to keep them from shaking. When we arrived, an older monk greeted us. He didn't ask why we were there. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and knowing, like he could already see what was following me. Without a word, he led us inside, past golden statues and the smell of burning incense. He told me to sit. Then he began chanting. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for the fear to disappear, for the weight on my chest to finally lift. But as he chanted, something changed. The air around me got heavier, thicker, like the room itself was pressing in on me. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Then the candles flickered. Not like a breeze had passed through, but like something had moved between them. And then the monk stopped. He looked at me, his face serious, and said something to my dad in Khmer. My dad's face went pale. I didn't understand everything, but I caught one word. Pray. The monk looked back at me, his voice low and firm. You must never let it take you. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Never let it take me. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. My dad nodded, listening intently as the monk spoke in hushed tones, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, the monk reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a thin red string. He wrapped it around my wrist, tying it tightly. This will protect you, he said. For now. For now. I wanted to believe him, wanted to feel safer, but the way he said it made my stomach twist. This wasn't a cure. It wasn't over. Whatever was haunting me wasn't gone. It was just being held back. The monk handed my dad a small bundle of dried herbs and a tiny amulet, instructing him to place them under my pillow and burn the herbs before bed. He told my father something else too, something I couldn't fully understand, but I caught the way my dad's fingers tightened around the amulet. On the drive home, I finally broke the silence. What did he say? My dad didn't answer right away. He just kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched tight. Then finally he exhaled. He said, "It's still watching you." I felt my stomach drop. Still watching me. I turned to look out the car window, half expecting to see something lurking in the trees, waiting just beyond the edge of the road. But there was nothing, just the stretch of highway, the occasional flickering streetlight, and the creeping sense that no matter where I went, it would always be there. That night, my dad did everything the monk had told him to. He burned the herbs in my room, the thick smoke filling every corner. He tucked the amulet under my pillow and placed small bowls of rice and salt by my door. It was meant to keep it out, to keep me safe. I wanted to believe it would work, but deep down, I wasn't sure anything could stop it. Still, exhaustion eventually won. I lay down, gripping the red string around my wrist, forcing myself to believe that I was protected, that I was safe. My eyes grew heavy, my breathing slowed, and before I knew it, I was asleep. And I was back. The dream was different this time. There was no endless hallway, no whispering voices, just darkness. Heavy, suffocating darkness. Then a voice, low, distorted, crawling into my ears like something rotten. You can't run forever. I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. My body felt trapped, like I was sinking into something thick and heavy. The voice slithered through the darkness, surrounding me, pressing against my skin. You think they can save you? It laughed, a slow, rasping sound that made my bones ache. Then I saw it, the eyes, burning, unblinking, locked onto me from the void. The shape of it flickered like smoke, shifting, stretching, curling around me. It didn't move toward me. It was already there. Its fingers brushed my arm, and I felt something ice-cold seep into my skin. A sharp, electric pain shot through my body, like something was being pulled from me. I screamed, forcing myself to fight, to move, to do something. But my limbs were heavy, my breath shallow. I was slipping. It was taking me. Then, suddenly, I felt a burning sensation on my wrist. The red string. It glowed, hot against my skin. And in that instant, the darkness recoiled. The grip on me loosened, and I tore myself awake, gasping for air. My whole body was shaking. The room was still thick with the scent of burnt herbs, the amulet cold beneath my pillow. But the worst part? The red string on my wrist was charred black. I stared at my wrist, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The red string, the one that was supposed to protect me, was no longer red. It was burned, the fibers blackened, brittle, as if something had tried to break it. I touched it carefully, afraid that if I pulled too hard, it would crumble away completely. My heart pounded. That thing had almost taken me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat up in bed, clutching the charred string, waiting for the sun to rise. The moment light filled my room, I ran to my dad and showed him. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at my wrist, his face tight with something between fear and realization. Then, without a word, he grabbed his keys again. We drove straight back to the temple. When the monk saw my wrist, his expression darkened. He took my hand gently, examining the burned string before shaking his head. "It's getting stronger," he muttered. My stomach turned. Stronger? That meant it wasn't giving up. It was just waiting. The monk didn't waste any time. He removed what was left of the string and replaced it with a new one, this time chanting as he tied it, knotting it tighter than before. But his face was grim. "This won't hold it off forever," he admitted. "You need to be ready." I didn't want to ask what he meant by ready. Ready for what? To face it? To fight it? The idea made my stomach twist. But the look on the monk's face told me that he wasn't being dramatic. He was serious. Dead serious. My dad tried to press him for answers, but the monk just shook his head, muttering prayers under his breath as he packed a small bag of charms, herbs, and another amulet. He handed it to my dad, saying, "Keep these close, and don't let him sleep unprotected." Unprotected. That word stuck with me the entire ride home. Was this really what my life had become? Always looking over my shoulder, always afraid to close my eyes? My dad didn't speak the entire drive, but I could feel his tension. He wasn't just worried for me, he was scared. That night, we followed the monk's instructions exactly. The herbs were burned again, the charms placed in every corner of my room, the new amulet under my pillow. I even wore another red string around my other wrist, doubling up, as if it could give me an extra layer of safety. But deep down, I knew the truth. These things were only delaying the inevitable. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion won. And once again, I found myself in the dream. This time, it didn't wait. The eyes were there immediately, glowing in the pitch-black void. I didn't even have a chance to think, to move, before it spoke. "No one can stop me. Not him. Not you." Its voice was louder now, sharper, cutting through me like a blade. Then it laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You're mine." I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness stretched endlessly in every direction, thick and suffocating. My legs felt like they were sinking into the void, my body growing heavier with every second. The thing didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its voice was already inside my head, curling around my thoughts like smoke. "You can fight, but you will lose." A sudden force slammed into my chest, and I was yanked backward. I couldn't see what had grabbed me, but I felt it, cold, sharp, sinking into my skin like claws. My body convulsed as a searing pain shot through me, like something was being ripped away. I gasped, struggling, but my limbs wouldn't obey me. My fingers twitched uselessly as the darkness swallowed me whole. Then, a blinding flash, white hot, searing through the void like fire. The grip on me snapped. The pain vanished. I felt myself falling, crashing through the darkness like something had torn me away from its grasp. A voice, different this time, familiar, echoed in the distance, calling my name. I clung to it, forcing myself toward the sound, and suddenly, I woke up. I was drenched in sweat, my chest heaving, my hands trembling violently. My dad was in my room, shaking me awake, his face pale. But before I could say anything, my eyes darted to my wrists. The red strings were gone, burned away completely. I couldn't breathe. My dad was still gripping my shoulders, his face tight with worry, but all I could do was stare at my wrists. The red strings, the only thing protecting me, were completely gone. Not just untied, not just broken. They had been burned away, leaving faint marks on my skin like something had melted them off. My dad must have seen the panic on my face because he turned and scanned the room like he expected something to still be there. The smell of burnt herbs still clung to the air, but something was off. The room felt wrong, like the energy had shifted, like something had been there and left the moment I woke up. My dad grabbed the amulet from under my pillow, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. "We're going back," he said, his voice shaking. An hour later, we were standing in front of the monk again. He didn't look surprised to see us. In fact, it was almost like he'd been expecting it. He took one look at my wrists and sighed. "It's stronger now," he murmured. "It's almost finished playing with you." I felt cold all over. "What does that mean?" The monk's face darkened. He met my eyes and said something that sent ice through my veins. "The next time it comes for you, it won't let go." My stomach dropped. My hands felt numb, like all the blood had drained from them. "The next time it comes for you, it won't let go." The words echoed in my head, making it hard to breathe. My dad started speaking rapidly in Khmer, his voice tight with desperation. The monk just listened, nodding slowly, as if he had heard all of this before. Then he turned to me. "You have one last chance," he said. "One way to break its hold before it takes you." I swallowed hard. "How?" The monk hesitated. "It marked you," he said. "It has your name. It knows your fear. The only way to break free is to face it, to see it for what it really is and reject it." His eyes darkened. "But if you fail, there will be no waking up." The word sent a chill through me. Face it? I couldn't even move in my dreams, let alone fight back. Every time it came for me, I barely escaped. And now I was supposed to challenge it? I wanted to argue, to tell him that this was impossible. But then I remembered the way it spoke to me last time, the way it laughed. It wasn't just hunting me. It was waiting for me to give up. The monk began preparing another ritual, stronger than the last. My dad was silent the entire time, but I could feel his fear. This wasn't just another attempt to hold it back. This was my last chance. That night, as I lay in bed, I gripped the new amulet so hard it left indentations in my palm. My heart pounded. I knew I would fall asleep eventually. And this time, there would be no running. The moment my eyes closed, I was there. The darkness swallowed me whole. But something was different. It was waiting for me. The air was thick, suffocating. The moment I arrived in the dream, I felt it closer than ever before. This wasn't like the other times where it lurked in the shadows, playing with me. This time, it was standing right in front of me. The glowing eyes burned like fire in the pitch-black void, locking onto me with something between hunger and amusement. It didn't speak right away. It didn't have to. I could feel its voice slithering into my head, twisting around my thoughts like it belonged there. "You came back." Its voice was deeper now, stronger, as if it knew it had already won. The darkness around it pulsed, shifting like it was alive. I wanted to run, to wake up, to do anything but stand there. But I remembered what the monk said. See it for what it really is. Reject it. I forced myself to speak. My voice was barely more than a whisper. "What are you?" It laughed, the sound scraping against my skull. Then it stepped closer. You already know. And suddenly I did. The truth hit me like a punch to the chest. This thing, this shadow that had been following me for years, wasn't just a spirit. It wasn't just some demon preying on random people. It had been invited in, not by me, not by my dad, but by the fear my family carried, by the stories, the warnings, the whispered legends passed down from the old country. It had been feeding off of us for generations, and now it had me. Unless I stopped it, I clenched my fists, my entire body shaking, not just from fear, but from anger. This thing had stolen my friends. It had followed my family, creeping into our lives like a sickness, waiting for its moment to take me too. And I had spent my whole life feeding it, letting it grow stronger with every nightmare, every sleepless night. But now I saw it. You don't own me, I said, my voice trembling but firm. You never did. The thing stopped moving. Its burning eyes narrowed, like it hadn't expected me to say that, like it hadn't expected resistance. The darkness around it shifted, pulsing violently. It spoke again, but this time, its voice sounded different, weaker. You can't escape me. I took a step forward. The shadows rippled. The fear in my chest was still there, but something else was growing inside me, control. This thing wanted me to be afraid. It needed me to be afraid. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't giving it what it wanted. You have no power over me. The moment I said it, the darkness around me cracked. The air seemed to bend, like reality itself was rejecting the thing's presence. Its body flickered, its shape distorting. It let out a guttural, rage-filled sound, something between a scream and a roar, but I kept pushing forward. You're not real, I said, louder this time. Not unless I let you be. The eyes flickered. The shadows around it shrank. I felt something snap, like a thread pulling away from my mind, unraveling the nightmare. The thing lurched forward, its fingers stretching, desperate to grab me one last time. But I was already waking up. I bolted upright in bed, gasping for air. My entire body was soaked in sweat, my fingers clutching the amulet so tightly that it dug into my palm. My dad was by my side in an instant, shaking me, calling my name, but I barely heard him because my room felt different. The air wasn't heavy anymore. The shadows in the corners were just that, shadows. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel eyes watching me from the dark. It was gone. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that, just in case. But when I finally did, there were no nightmares, no whispers, no burning eyes waiting in the void. The thing that had haunted me for my entire life had lost. But even now, all these years later, I still wonder, had I really defeated it? Or was it just waiting for me to be afraid again?